This is the Authority Partners podcast.
Welcome to Authority Partners podcast on artificial intelligence software. I would like to present you our guest Dino Esposito. Dino is one of the world famous software artists. He's from Rome, Italy. I'm sure anybody who is in architecture and software technology in general has encountered his books.
And they have bought my book. Hey, by the way,
yes.
It's me.
And posts articles more like MSDN Magazine and others, and probably met him at a conference and other events. So Dino is also, in my opinion, an original thinker in this domain. So welcome, Dino. We are happy to have you here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
First of all, I would like to start with the topic of REST and APIs in general. And from what I read, you have an original take on all this, and you have even coined the term bittersweet taste of it. And could you explain us a little bit more about that, maybe?
Yes. In over 25 years of career, I think, or at least I love to think that I've been able to mature, to generate a sort of sensibility that takes me to have a strong take on some topics related to software technology. So there are some buzzwords that instinctively I feel I love, and there are some others, the majority, that I just feel I hate them, or I don't find them particularly suitable or particularly interesting beyond.
Or intriguing.
Tricky. Beyond. I mean, at least compared to the common sense of the importance of those buzzwords. And the rest is, by all means, one of those. Now, why REST is or should be really important to developers? I guess that if you go on the street and you take any developers that is walking around the street and ask him or her, what about REST? What do you think about REST? Is REST crucial to your everyday job? They say, absolutely yes. REST is crucial for our applications to talk to other applications, for us to expose our own API, to make our platform easy to consume for other clients and for our customers, to expose our content and things like that. Okay, that's fine. But this is not exactly REST. This is just the role of something called, since the early days of software, application programming interface. So it's a way for you to make available, publicly available, or anyway, available according to certain rules and policies you, as the owner of the information, provide content, whatever content means to you, software, functions, plain content, whatever. Now, what is REST? REST, now, technically is a definition of an abstraction which was devised by a PhD student 20 years ago, sort of 20 years ago. The 2000 is, 20 years ago. So it seems it was the other day, but it's 20 years now. So in 20 years, the world changed completely. In 2000, there was nothing like the .NET framework from Microsoft. And Microsoft is at least half the software industry, at the very minimum, right? So in 2000, there was nothing like .NET yet. So it was a completely different world. We didn't have anything like e-commerce 20 years ago. So the REST, representational state transfer, was the PhD dissertation of a student. And we built out of that, the world, the pillars of the IT world for the successive 20 years, the successive 2 decades. So now, by this, do I mean that REST is something total stupid, total useless? Not exactly, because there was a good idea behind the representational state transfer as it was devised 20 years ago. But that's the point. Let's try to move the time machine back 2 decades and try to put ourselves in the context in the IT context we were living 2 decades ago. It was a time in which internet was coming up. Okay, it was only a few years that internet was publicly available in terms of BBS, in terms of websites, in terms of internet. But in 2000, only in the United States you could see on TV the first ads, the first commercials mentioning websites. All the rest of the world in 2000 was still running classic canonical commercials in which the companies were inviting you to visit their store, their physical stores. But in the US in 2000, there was, okay, visit us at whateverit.com. The .com bubble in stock exchange had still to come in 2000. So it was a totally different world. In that world, in that context, a basic idea like, okay, let's try to rule out the way in which content over the web should be consumed, done from a smart student, that makes total sense. But that was 2 decades ago. Now, project that idea through the evolution that we went through in 2 decades, and I'm not completely sure we still need to take REST at least literally. The point that, in my opinion, allowed REST to survive for 2 decades and still gain over time relevance is because of alternatives, the lack of alternatives, and because of the force of the mouth. So by the force of mouth, REST and REST. You say REST, I say REST, he says REST, everyone says REST. REST is the way to go. And the more the REST is talked, the more people, managers, decision makers are afraid to drop it because, oh, everyone does it, why not us? But now, again, technically, what is REST? And then we start from, let's set this base ground, and then we move forward with more technical and more precise questions. REST is create, read, update, delete, the classic crude from the database world applied to the world of the web. So what we are talking about is given a resource, and the definition of what is a resource is application specific, which could be an invoice, could be a microservice, could be whatever you want to command remotely through a sequence of commands. And then on this resource, whatever that means, which is publicly available over the web, you operate against this resource through 4 basic commands, which are the web counterpart of the classic create, read, update, and delete operations we know from databases.
Yes, thank you. So my experience is actually that it didn't take very fast. I would say it took some years. I would say that around probably a whole decade, around 2010 or something like that, we started to actually utilize REST. Before that, it was all old web services. You would use ASMX or I don't know, WSDL to get there or something like that. So REST, it took some time for REST to actually emerge.
You mentioned 2010. Okay, let's go back with the time machine to that age, 10 years ago. 10 years ago was the probably, if I remember correctly, was more or less the time in which Silverlight was dying. And why is Silverlight crucial? Because Silverlight was maybe the too early attempt to try to produce and to make available to the community a different flavor of a web. So a web in which you were still using the browser as the central mean to access functionalities, but you were also trying to put into the browser different technologies to support the development of applications. So no more JavaScript or not much JavaScript, not much CSS, not much HTML, but something different. And in particular, Silverlight was trying to push instead of HTML something okay, maybe too much complicated, like XAML. Instead of JavaScript, was trying to push C# or anyway .NET languages, and something from the insides of XAML in place of to replace CSS. But that was the point. The unfortunate point was instead that at that time, 10 years ago, instead of producing a completely new environment, which was impossible to achieve, they had to go through the mechanism of plugins. And in a way, the advent of Silverlight was seen mostly as a way to kill the attempt of Microsoft to kill the Adobe's Flash product, rather than as a way to push in the right direction the future development of the web. So there was a sort of a different, wrong perspective that Silverlight was put in itself. And anyway, whatever was the reason, Silverlight failed. After a few years of growth, it just failed and disappeared. And that was the restoration of the old web. So there was the return of JavaScript. JavaScript was on the brink, of disaster, and then he backfired. He came back, he resurrected, and he conquered the world. And with it, CSS, and we did HTML. It's a restoration.
Thank you for this time machine travel. It was interesting. It was exactly what happened. However, I remember at that time, I was always kind of leery of Silverlight. When it was a hype, I was always telling that it's not going to survive because of two things. First of all, you need to install a plugin over there, and then secondly, you couldn't communicate other than to WCF, which is something that big corporations, enterprises would never allow. So in the beginning, for me, it seemed like a very bad idea, and I was right. Thank you very much. So that summarizes the very important topic of REST and the APIs in general. I would now like to move on to gRPC. A very important emerging technology. So my understanding is that it's mainly used for server-to-server communication in the backend because
so far.
So because that's where it's most useful, and it is really fast. It's based on protobufs, and then it is succinct. It's the machine serialized binary. It's like beautiful. But now, in your opinion, what are really the advantages of gRPC? What place do you think it will take in our everyday work? And is this like a must-to-know technology that we'll have to master in the near future?
I believe that gRPC is the right way to go. And the reason is that it came out of a real-world experience, whereas REST was originated from a theoretical dissertation of a student. gRPC instead came out of the real-world experience of serious professionals working at Google in the beginning.
From the pain.
Yeah, exactly. So gRPC, now it's an open, since 2015, I guess, it's an open source project, but originally it was developed at Google. So it was developed at Google by people working at Google and with the specific purpose of making their own within the company inter-app communication as fast and as reliable as possible. So they decided at Google to not to use REST, and I guess they had their own reasons for doing that, and they wanted to experiment building something totally different. Totally different means that gRPC is a sort of point-to-point connection. It's what, if we again reuse the time machine, Microsoft attempted back then, when before .NET came, when they tried with a distributed version of COM, the Component Object Model, of the 90s. As a funny story, you may know the first law of distributed software that Don Box created at the time. So the first, he was presenting at a conference, DCOM, and says, before we talk DCOM, let me introduce you to the first law of distributed software. And the law says, do not distribute it. So, yes. So distributed software is, anyway, a pain in the proverbial neck. And it's unavoidable to some extent. So the point is, how can we make the connections as clean, as direct, and as effective as possible? Tight connection. Yeah. So you define a contract. You define a contract by the provider, and that any client has to honor. That's it. And then there's some underlying machinery, but once you know the contract that is at one end, you can force two communicating parts to adhere to some sort of technological stack that is tailor-made for being as fast and as effective, maybe binary, maybe taking advantage of streaming and other things that technology is making possible today.
And then you also have a bidirectional communication.
You have a bidirectional communication as well.
Which is important.
So exactly, but this is, gRPC is the modern and effective solution to a problem we always had. And then we stupidly, let me use this adverb, we stupidly insist to solve the wrong way in the name of, I don't know exactly in the name of what. We use REST for what?
Yeah.
Okay, so rest in peace is is the slogan that comes to mind when I think of gRPC and contract-based communication, which brings us back to the real business reason why we are talking about REST versus gRPC these days. What we want to do exactly? All that we want to do is exposing our own segment of content and functions as providers so that clients can use those services according to our own rules. So it's about exposing an API, but it's me, okay, the provider that has the right and in some way also the duty to decide how I want to expose my things. And it's me to design the contract according to which you, the client, can connect and use my own stuff. And it's me to define the contract. I don't want to have some general purpose, abstract rules to force me to do or not to do things.
I see you have very strong feelings about these topics, which is good. I totally agree with you. But I also feel somehow that we are naturally moving toward progression. So yeah, there were old services before, but then the rest had its place. It was definitely something like at least the way it was doing things, it filled in the gap. And now the gRPC would be just like the future. So kind of, I see the flow over there. Don't you see it?
Okay. The point is, you can nobody prevents you from exposing your API over plain HTTP 1.1. No problem. You can do that.
Okay.
And returning JSON. That's absolutely fine. I mean, it's you. It's your decision. So I'm not questioning the fact that you have to use gRPC, which is binary, which runs over HTTP2, which uses protobuf and all those things, versus using maybe simpler to implement, maybe even broader in terms of diffusion API based on HTTP 1.1 and JSON or even XML or plain text for serializing the information. Those are two approaches. But the point is that I don't see any business value in forcing the simple way of exposing the API, so the HTTP 1.1 and JSON, to adhere to some abstract rules of REST. You can, I mean, I don't see the point of returning 200 whether there is an error in the back end or not.
So everybody seems to do it in their own flavor. So
exactly.
To say,
So if you Google for REST interface or queries like the right way to do REST, you will find a million different recipes, which means that there is no recipe at all.
Yes.
So there's no clear way how to do REST, which is not exactly a good statement for the relevance of the thing in itself.
I understand. One last question about gRPC. What do you think would be a challenge in implementing it? Right now, you kind of need to understand the HTTP much better. You need to go over HTTP2. Then you need to understand like a protobuf lingo to some extent, and stuff like that. So there is like a more challenge for the average developer than in comparison with the rest.
I don't think so. I mean, my vision of gRPC is, let's say, limited to the Google API for .NET Core and to the implementation of gRPC, of the gRPC protocol that you find in ASP.NET Core 3 point something, 0 and 1 and in the future. I mean, at that point, or the only thing you have to be aware of is the language in which you have to define the contract. So, it's not C#. It's a sort of pseudo language, but nothing really complicated to learn. It's just about how you define the interface. I mean, it's not really different from using C# for defining classic type I whatever. That's the only thing you need to know, and then how the contract interacts with the client and the server. But in the end, it's writing a service that imports and exposes a contract, and then it's about writing code to give substance to the endpoints. It mostly depends on the framework. So ASP.NET Core probably makes it much easier than the raw Google provided SDK for different languages. But I believe that in the future, even beyond the .NET Core, there will be more and more frameworks to make it simpler to arrange a gRPC solution. So I'm not really concerned on this point.
To wrap the challenges over there, so to say, so that you can work seamlessly. I would like to conclude this podcast. Thank you very much for joining us for this Authority Partners podcast on building architecting intelligent software.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Authority Partners podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode.